The brain is a dynamic, ever-changing system capable of remodeling itself through experience, behavior, and intention, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. This is not a metaphor or philosophical idea, it is a biological reality. Your brain rewires itself in response to what you do, think, and feel. Each thought pattern, behavior, and repeated action carves out neural pathways, much like grooves being formed on a record. This means that belief in yourself is not something that you either have or lack. It is something you can train. It begins with small actions, incremental steps that may seem trivial at the moment, but have profound cumulative effects. For example, choosing to make your bed in the morning, finish a workout, or speak up in a meeting sends signals to your brain that you are in control and capable. These moments activate circuits in the prefrontal cortex and striatum, areas responsible for decision-making, confidence, and goal-directed behavior. Over time, with repetition, these circuits become stronger, making belief in yourself more automatic and deeply embedded. Neuroplasticity supports this entire process. It's how we learn new skills, recover from injury, and most importantly, how we reshape our perception of who we are. When people believe they cannot change, they are often unaware that their brain is wired for change. By understanding and leveraging neuroplasticity, we unlock the ability to reprogram limiting beliefs and replace them with constructive, empowering ones. A key point is that plasticity follows use. It doesn't happen just by wishing or thinking positively. It occurs through action and reinforcement. If you avoid challenges or reinforce self-doubt, those circuits become stronger. But if you engage in behaviors aligned with growth, no matter how uncomfortable or unfamiliar, your brain adapts. Even failure, if approached with the intent to learn, strengthens the brain's capacity for resilience and belief. The discomfort that accompanies these efforts is not a sign of weakness. It's evidence that the brain is being pushed to adapt. This is particularly relevant in adulthood, where neuroplasticity becomes gated by attention and effort. The more focused and consistent you are, the more likely it is that the brain will change in response. That's why belief in yourself is not reserved for the lucky or gifted. It is accessible to anyone willing to engage in the daily practice of intentional behavior and focused effort. Whether you're trying to learn a new language, build a business, or overcome anxiety, the process is the same: repeated exposure to challenging but manageable tasks performed with deliberate focus and reinforced through positive feedback loops. Each time you act in line with the version of yourself you aspire to be, your brain updates its model of who you are. Over time, this builds an authentic, biologically rooted foundation of self-belief, one that is earned, not imagined. Visualizing success is often dismissed as wishful thinking or pseudo-motivation, but from a neuroscience perspective, it's a powerful method to activate specific brain circuits related to motivation, planning, and action. When you vividly imagine yourself achieving a goal, completing a challenging project, mastering a new skill, or reaching a personal milestone, your brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagined success and real life experience. This mental simulation triggers the release of dopamine, a neuromodulator deeply associated with anticipation, motivation, and reward. Dopamine is not just the molecule of pleasure, it's the molecule of pursuit. It energizes the body and mind to move toward the goal, increasing your focus and willingness to work through obstacles. The key lies in how vividly and consistently you can visualize the process, not just the outcome. It's not about imagining yourself receiving applause or external rewards, but about mentally rehearsing the small, repetitive steps it takes to get there. When you simulate the process, the long hours of effort, the discipline, the moments of struggle and recovery, you strengthen the neural networks responsible for task execution, behavioral endurance, and self-regulation. Functional MRI studies have shown that visualizing movement or success activates many of the same brain regions as actually performing those actions, including the motor cortex, prefrontal cortex, and striatum. This mental rehearsal lays down a template in the brain that makes it easier to act in alignment with those goals when the time comes. It reduces hesitation, sharpens clarity, and instills a sense of familiarity with success. This matters because the brain is biased toward the familiar. If you've never pictured yourself succeeding, your brain may default to patterns of avoidance or disbelief simply because the goal feels foreign. Visualization can overcome this resistance by pre-exposing your brain to the outcome and wiring it into your identity. Over time, as you repeatedly visualize and take small steps toward your vision, you activate and reinforce the brain's reward systems, making the path feel more attainable. This isn't a substitute for action. It's a tool to prime the brain for action. The combination of visualizing and doing creates the most powerful form of neuroplastic change. This explains why elite athletes, performers, and high-functioning professionals often use visualization as a preparatory and recovery technique. They are not just imagining success, they are building the neurochemical and structural basis for belief, performance, and resilience. The brain responds to repeated exposure, whether that exposure is real or imagined. So by visualizing success in clear, structured, emotionally resonant ways, you prepare your brain to pursue and believe in outcomes that currently feel out of reach. In this way, belief becomes less about blind faith and more about biological preparation. You are training your nervous system to recognize and pursue greatness with more efficiency and less internal resistance. Setting specific, measurable micro goals is not just a productivity tactic. It's a neurological strategy that aligns with how the brain processes reward, motivation, and learning. The brain thrives on clarity and structure. When goals are vague or overly ambitious, it creates cognitive overload, uncertainty, and emotional paralysis, often leading to procrastination or avoidance. However, when you break a large goal into small, actionable steps that are clearly defined and measurable, you create a roadmap that the brain can follow with confidence. Each time you complete one of these micro goals, your brain rewards you with a small but significant release of dopamine. This neurochemical release reinforces the behavior, increases motivation for the next task, and strengthens the neural pathways involved in achievement and belief. Dopamine is not released simply at the finish line of a major achievement. It's released in proportion to perceived progress. This is why small wins are biologically powerful. Completing a 10-minute workout, writing a single paragraph, or waking up on time may seem insignificant in isolation, but to the brain, these are signals of competence and forward movement. Over time, these repeated signals build a feedback loop where effort leads to reward, which leads to more effort. This is how momentum is created at a neurochemical level. Moreover, setting micro goals helps reduce the emotional weight of failure. If a large goal is missed, the emotional and neurological response can include feelings of inadequacy, cortisol spikes, and avoidance behavior. But when progress is broken down into achievable chunks, each success buffers against the fear of failure and creates psychological safety to continue. This approach also trains your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, planning, and decision-making. By repeatedly setting, pursuing, and completing small goals, you increase your brain's capacity for sustained focus and delayed gratification. This is especially important for long-term ambitions that require consistency over time. Each completed micro goal serves as evidence that you are someone who can follow through, reinforcing identity and belief at a cellular level. From a biological standpoint, consistency trumps intensity. A massive, sporadic effort is far less effective for neural rewiring than consistent, moderate effort repeated over time. This is why creating a structure of micro goals that you can realistically sustain is crucial. In addition, micro goals help mitigate the effect of cognitive fatigue. The brain only has so much working memory and attentional bandwidth per day. By narrowing your focus to one or two specific actions, you conserve mental energy and increase the likelihood of completion. This lowers friction and reduces the likelihood of decision paralysis, which is often the enemy of productivity and self-belief. When your brain learns that you can set a goal and meet it, even a small one, it begins to generalize that confidence across other areas. This is known as self-efficacy, and it is one of the most important predictors of long-term success. Stress is often misunderstood as a purely negative force, something to be avoided or suppressed. However, from a neuroscience and performance standpoint, stress is a critical signal, an internal indicator that the brain and body are being pushed beyond their current limits. This state, while uncomfortable, is precisely where growth occurs. When stress arises in response to challenge, uncertainty, or effort, the body activates the sympathetic nervous system. Heart rate increases, focus sharpens, and neurochemicals such as norepinephrine and adrenaline surge. These are not signs of failure. They are biological preparations for adaptation. The brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex and limbic system, goes into a heightened state of alertness, becoming more plastic and receptive to learning during these moments. This is why stress, when managed correctly, is not only tolerable, it's essential for high performance and belief formation. The key is to reframe stress from being a threat to being a cue. When the mind perceives a difficult task as a danger, the stress response becomes maladaptive, leading to avoidance, negative rumination, or even shutdown. But when that same stress is interpreted as a sign that something important is happening, the brain reacts differently. It shifts from a defensive to an adaptive mode. This psychological shift is supported by studies showing that individuals who view stress as enhancing rather than debilitating actually perform better under pressure and show more resilience over time. Their stress responses, while physiologically similar, are mentally directed toward growth. Understanding this mechanism allows us to use stress as a lever for progress. For example, stepping into a new role, presenting in public, or starting a difficult habit may all generate stress, but this stress is exactly what signals the brain to pay attention. In these moments, neuroplasticity is amplified, meaning that the brain is primed to make lasting changes. This is an opportunity zone, a window where your nervous system is open to encoding new behaviors, beliefs, and capabilities. It is during these times, not moments of ease, that belief in oneself is forged. Importantly, stress needs to be followed by recovery. Growth does not occur during the stressful moment itself, but in the aftermath, when the body and brain consolidate the experience. Proper sleep, nutrition, and periods of deliberate rest help the nervous system recover and integrate the adaptations made during stress exposure. This balance of stress and recovery, what's often referred to as stress inoculation, builds resilience. Each cycle of stress and recovery makes you more equipped to handle future challenges with clarity and confidence. Learning to harness stress as a tool means acknowledging that discomfort is part of the process. You cannot expand your capacity or achieve meaningful goals without encountering resistance. But resistance is not a wall. It is a signal that you are entering a space where the brain must evolve. And every time you push through that space and emerge intact, your brain encodes the memory, I can do hard things. Over time, this builds a durable belief system grounded not in fantasy, but in lived biological experience. Stress, therefore, becomes not the enemy of self-belief, but its catalyst. Consistency is not just a matter of discipline or willpower. It is a fundamental requirement for reshaping the brain and identity. From a neuroscience perspective, every action you take repeatedly strengthens the neural pathways associated with that behavior. These repeated patterns of activity, over time, become automatic, efficient, and eventually form the foundation of who you are. This process is known as long-term potentiation, a key element of neuroplasticity where synaptic connections between neurons become stronger the more often they are activated together. The brain learns through repetition, not intention alone. So when you consistently perform behaviors aligned with your goals, even if they seem small or insignificant in the moment, you are training your nervous system to adopt those behaviors as part of your core identity. This is why consistency is more biologically powerful than intensity. A single burst of motivation might create temporary excitement or progress, but it does not create enduring change. In contrast, performing small, deliberate actions every day creates lasting modifications in brain circuits, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, basal ganglia, and motor networks. These areas are responsible for planning, execution, and habit formation. When you repeat positive behaviors daily, such as journaling, exercising, learning a new skill, or even practicing mindfulness, these neural circuits become more efficient and the behavior becomes second nature. As a result, the brain begins to recognize this as part of who you are. You're no longer someone trying to do something. You become someone who does it. Consistency also plays a critical role in how we perceive ourselves. Every repeated action serves as evidence. When your brain sees that you show up day after day for your goals, it encodes that repetition into your self-concept. This process doesn't require external validation. It relies entirely on what your brain observes you doing. Over time, your identity starts to shift, not based on what you say or wish, but on what you repeatedly do. This self-generated evidence is crucial for building self-belief. You're training your brain to associate effort with capability and persistence with transformation. On a chemical level, Consistent behavior also stabilizes dopamine regulation. Rather than chasing massive spikes in motivation that crash quickly, the brain learns to derive satisfaction from progress. This builds emotional regulation, lowers impulsivity, and increases the ability to stay focused over longer periods. Consistency creates rhythm, and rhythm calms the nervous system, allowing for better executive function and less cognitive fatigue. In this way, consistency not only reinforces identity, but creates the mental space to solve harder problems and set higher goals. The real transformation happens when you persist in action despite fluctuations in mood or external conditions. This type of consistency teaches the brain to override short-term emotional impulses in favor of long-term vision. It builds what is called top-down control, the ability of your prefrontal cortex to guide your actions rather than being pulled by momentary feelings or distractions. This is the biological basis of self-control and long-term confidence. You are showing your brain that goals matter more than mood, and that identity is a reflection of behavior over time. Ultimately, if you want to believe in yourself and achieve meaningful things, the most effective and sustainable way to do so is through consistency. Not massive effort all at once, but repeated effort in the direction of your values. With each day of consistent action, you are quite literally building the neural framework of a person who follows through, who learns, who grows, and who ultimately succeeds. Surrounding yourself with the right people is not just about social preference. It is a matter of neurological influence. Human beings are wired for social learning. From infancy through adulthood, our brains are constantly scanning the environment, especially other people, to model behaviors, emotions, and beliefs. This is mediated by specialized neural circuits called mirror neurons, which activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that action. These circuits are key to empathy, imitation, and learning. What this means is that the people around you are not just influencing your mood or motivation in a general way, they are literally shaping your brain. If you're surrounded by individuals who are driven, curious, accountable, and optimistic, your brain begins to mirror those traits over time. You adopt their language patterns, emotional tone, problem-solving style, and belief systems, often without conscious awareness. This phenomenon is particularly powerful when it comes to belief in oneself. If you're consistently exposed to people who challenge themselves, recover from setbacks, and celebrate effort rather than perfection, you start to internalize those same principles. Your brain sees their behavior as evidence that growth is possible, that struggle is part of the process, and that achievement is earned, not gifted. In contrast, when you spend time with individuals who dwell in cynicism, fear, or learned helplessness, those same limiting narratives can become part of your internal script. Not because you choose to adopt them, but because your brain is biologically designed to absorb the emotional and behavioral energy of your surroundings. The saying, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," is more than a motivational quote. It is a statement grounded in how the human nervous system learns and adapts. Additionally, being in an environment of high performers or committed individuals creates a type of positive peer pressure that activates your own prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for goal setting, attention, and impulse control. When you see others showing up consistently, taking bold actions, or confronting their fears, your brain responds by raising its own internal standards. This is not about competition, but about shared neurobiological momentum. You begin to associate effort and self-belief with the group identity, which amplifies your own capacity to stay committed to your goals. The group becomes a regulatory mechanism for your behavior, helping to stabilize mood, sharpen focus, and reinforce habits that align with your aspirations. Social connection also modulates key neurochemicals like oxytocin and serotonin, which contribute to emotional regulation, confidence, and well-being. When you engage in supportive, constructive interactions, your brain becomes more resilient to stress and more capable of taking healthy risks. These biochemical effects are not abstract. They influence how you perceive challenges, how long you persist in difficulty, and how quickly you recover from setbacks. In other words, the right people don't just inspire you, they biologically reinforce your capacity to believe in yourself and grow. Choosing who you allow into your life is therefore a strategic decision with deep neurological consequences. It's not about isolating yourself from imperfection, but about being intentional with who you let influence your nervous system. Seek out people whose values, behaviors, and mindset align with the identity you want to build. And just as importantly, be that person for others. Because as you engage in a network of mutual reinforcement, where belief, growth, and accountability are the standard, you're not just changing your environment, you're changing your brain, and with it, what you believe you're capable of achieving.